Hi, my name's Caroline. I'm a senior, proud liberal. My question for
thank you for coming.
Yes, of course.
Whenever somebody on the left comes to one of my lectures, it's like an AA meeting. It's like, thank you, Caroline, for coming.
So my question is, since you believe abortion is the same as murder, do you believe women who get abortions, even when their lives or the child's life isn't in danger, should be put on trial for murder? Yes or no?
I think abortionists should be put on trial.
But I mean,
I don't think that women should be put on trial for a couple of different reasons. So the first reason is because I don't think that it is effective in deterring abortion to put women on trial for the killing of the unborn. The second reason is because I think that we in our society have unfortunately gotten to such a point that an entire generation have been indoctrinated to believe, particularly an entire generation of women, since that's what we're talking about here, have been indoctrinated to believe that a baby is a polyp, and so when they remove it, I'm not sure there's the actual mens rea necessary, the actual criminal intent necessary for a prosecution. So when we're talking about, the typical pro-life position here has been that the woman is a victim in abortion nearly as much as the baby is, that there's an entire abortion industry that is geared toward teaching women that babies are not babies and that getting a baby aborted is, in fact, a betterment of their life. So, no, I'm not in favor of prosecuting women for abortions.
But, there are a lot of women who do have the intent, right? Like, if a woman goes to an abortion clinic, they are ordering the murder of their child, in your opinion, like what you would say. So do they not have the mens rea?
So I just gave you two reasons. One, a public policy one, and one, you'd have to show me, you'd really have to show me the case of a woman who went in there and said, I know this is a baby, cut its brains out. If that's happening, then that is infanticide. I mean, that's wouldn't you acknowledge? I mean, if a woman walked in with a baby that was 1 day old and said, here's my baby, kill it, wouldn't you put her on trial? But that's not what we're talking about. In the vast majority of abortions, the truth is, unfortunately, that women don't actually believe they are killing a child. They actually believe they are killing something that is non-human and is the same thing as removing a tumor or something.
So, but are you saying that you don't think abortion is murder then? Because there are.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that I'm saying that the vast majority of women who obtain abortions don't think that abortion is murder, and intent is a fundamental element in any criminal prosecution. I feel horrible for women who have abortions. I think that it's terrible for them. I think it's a lot worse for the baby.
But
obviously.
What's key is that you said a vast majority, right? There are women out there who know that it is a child.
And you make law and public policy based on the vast majority, not on the outlying case.
Yeah, but then you can't make a claim that abortion is the same as murder if you wouldn't treat them the same in public policy or in law and discourse.
No, I absolutely can, because there are many types of murder, right? I mean, there's manslaughter.
Yeah.
There's unintentional murder.
I mean, what would your standards be?
So the doctor knows. That's why I'm saying the doctor has the mens rea. The doctor has the actual intent to commit a murder, because the doctor full well knows that is a baby in there who's beating hard he or she is stopping.
So indirect.
So I have a comment and a legitimate question. The comment being, while there's a lot of things I disagree with what you're saying, but I definitely agree with your opinions on how culture is ruining the black community and why blacks don't graduate from high school due to culture. I think there's an element that you might be missing, and I'm not sure if you brought it up before. In the late 60s, early 70s, or late 70s, early 80s, when CIA introduced crack into the black community, which started a snowball effect of, blacks being overly criminalized for drug possessions, black fathers leaving the home and not sticking around, which led into, in the 80s of black children being being brought up without fathers, with mothers not being able to give them proper discipline. And while I do agree today that black communities suffer, for not having fathers in the household, but equally due to the culture around them. Like I suffered from it myself. If a black person wants to be educated in the hood, we get called house Negroes and Uncle Toms. If I want to better myself, but I was the element of originally introducing crack into those communities, which eliminated fathers from the home, I think those still have effects today. And while I agree that there isn't systemic racism keeping black people down now, I think the triggers that happened back then still affect us today.
Okay, so obviously past affects present, no question. The question is who committed the injustice and who should be punished for it. As far as the CIA introducing crack in the black community, I'm going to plead ignorance on this one because I have no idea whether that's true. Okay, but I will say that when it comes to single motherhood in the black community, that did not start in the 1980s with crack. That started in the mid-60s with the increase in welfare. The increase in the welfare state dramatically increased the level of single motherhood in the black community It was 20% around 1960. Today it's in excess of 70%.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think that the crack epidemic can actually explain all of that, because the crack epidemic really lasted from like the early 80s to basically the early 90s. And you've seen it continue, single motherhood continued to grow actually in the black community. It's sort of stabilized now, but it continued to grow for a long while after that. Also, I think it's worthwhile noting that when we say things like, somebody introduced crack into the black community, whoever, quote unquote, introduced crack into the black community, and again, I have no information to substantiate your theory, but it is individuals who take crack, right? Unless you are forcibly being injected with crack, then you have to make the choice to take the crack in the first place. And it's also worth noting that there were a lot of black legislators in the inner city who were looking for harsher sentences on crack cocaine, specifically because it was an epidemic in the inner city and was ruining a lot of lives. So the only way I think that when it comes to the single greatest intergenerational poverty statistic, the only way to walk this back is not through reparations, I think. It's through it really is through culture. It's through reinculcating the idea that fathers need to stick around, and you're a bastard if you don't stick around after you father a child.
Absolutely. So my question...
And that's true for white, black, or green. It doesn't matter to me. I'm a dad too. You abandon your kids, you are just the worst kind of piece of garbage.
Absolutely. So my question, I started getting involved in, so to speak, right-leaning issues after Milo came to Berkeley. I got assaulted by an Antifa member. He tried to set me on fire with a lit flare. He called me a Nazi. Just today, I got called a Nazi.
You don't look like a Nazi, I got to tell you.
No. Just today, I got called a Nazi, a fascist, and I consider myself a left-leaning liberal centrist. Now, with that said, MAGA crew has shown me so much love in these past 8 months. Everyone I've met has been reasonable, opened up their homes to me. We've had wonderful discourse. So my question now is, as a person who, like I said, considers myself a liberal, and I interact with people, on the right and MAGA crew, I still have people in my own personal community that, say that, oh, you're talking to whites, you're supporting white supremacy, you're talking to Nazis, you're supporting them. What would you say to a person like me who is open to discourse and people of all sides? How would you combat, or at least how would you approach people who come with me with hate and saying like, no, you're a bad person because you're hanging out with these people?
Well,
how
again,
should I approach them?
So I have a basic rule on this, and it's the same, again, regardless of color, because I've said this to people of every color. If somebody calls you a racist or a bigot based on no evidence, this makes them a bad person, and you have every right to say so. They need to actually cite evidence for why you're a racist or a bigot or a bad person before they can call you that. It needs to actually be justified. And you have every rationale to walk away from that conversation thinking that person is a worse person if they can't explain to you what you've done wrong and why what you've done is so terrible.
Okay, that works for me.
And thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Ben, I'm honored to be the second participant in this game show. But you made the argument that the gender pay gap is a myth.
Yes.
And one of the main reasons that this is the case is because that female STEM education is at a lower level than it is for men. Females are continually discouraged to not go into STEM fields at a rate that's like much lower than men are. So I was wondering what you feel about this argument, and how do you think it should be remedied, or like nothing?
Well,
should be done?
I think that it's a free country. You can choose what profession to go into. If the idea is that the pay gap is largely due to profession choice, that's obviously true. If you look at a lot of dangerous professions, firemen, people who work on oil rigs, it tends to be men because men want to go into those professions. It's also true that men tend to spend more hours in the workplace. It's also true that women tend to take more time off with babies. That's not a bad thing, by the way. It's not a rip on women. It's always bewildering to me when feminists are like, it's terrible that women take time off to be with their babies. Why? I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, completely agree. But I think there is a societal discouragement for women to go into these particular fields. I was wondering if, you as a problem.
I don't see a ton of evidence that there's societal disparagement of women going into being a firefighter. What I actually see is that there's an affirmative action program in many of these cases for women going into things like firefighting, because there's now an affirmative attempt to get women into these fields.
I was referring to STEM fields, like science, technology.
So the STEM. Okay, so James Damore has an interesting memo that got him fired from Google on this. But it is certainly true that when you look at, for example, what women major in college, the number of women who major in STEM studies, which has nothing to do with getting a job and paying, women major in humanities much more than men do. Men are just interested in this stuff more. That's not a terrible thing. I don't see why that.
Yeah, but there's societal influence that occurs even before the college level, right?
I don't know that there are a lot of people saying to a 7th grade girl who's good at math, you need to stop that and go read some poetry. Listen, I have I have 3 younger sisters, right? I have my wife is a doctor, by the way. So talking about STEM, my wife's a doctor. My mom runs companies. This is what she does. So I'm very much for women in the workplace and being able for them to choose what they want to choose. I really don't see a lot. If you can tell me the person who's out there going, women in science, fie, then I'll stand with you and say, yeah, that person's adult. That's really stupid. You know, if a woman wants to go into science and she's qualified for the job the same way that an equally qualified guy is, great. What I don't want is lowering of standards in science to meet any particular person, and I also don't want this idea that because a woman chooses not to go into science, and a lot of women choose not to go into science, and that creates a disproportionate percentage based on individual choice, that suddenly this is some sort of group discrimination happening in front of us.